It's always been glaringly obvious that Liam and Sarah held a different place in my parents' hearts than I did. From childhood, their achievements and aspirations were celebrated in a way mine never were. Still, I never imagined they'd resort to severing ties completely. Disowning a child simply for wanting to pursue an education? It seemed incomprehensible, yet that's precisely where I found myself. To paint a picture, I was a sophomore at State University. Not a prestigious Ivy League like Liam, but a solid school that I'd fought tooth and nail to get into. I was holding my own, not setting the world on fire, but passing my classes and, surprisingly, making friends, something that eluded me in high school. The first semester went relatively smoothly, but as the second term began, everything seemed to unravel. It was a typical Saturday, one where I was holed up in my dorm room, buried in textbooks and catching up on Netflix. My parents were the furthest thing from my mind. Frankly, their interest in my daily life was minimal. Around lunchtime, I was summoned downstairs, the tone suggesting some urgent family matter. As I descended, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally ask about my classes, express some genuine interest in my life. Wishful thinking, I soon realized. I took a seat on the living room couch, and my dad began to speak. He adopted that lawyerly tone I knew so well, that veneer of reasonableness that masked his manipulative agenda. "Maya," he started, "we've been discussing your future. We have something important to talk about." In my head, I entertained the possibility of internship advice, career guidance, anything positive. Instead, my dad dropped a bombshell. "We've decided it would be best for you to take a break from college." My mind went blank. The words simply didn't register. "What do you mean, take a break?" I asked, incredulous. My mom jumped in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You've been doing fine, honey, but we think it's time you started contributing more to the family. Liam is starting law school soon, and we need to ensure Sarah's future is secure too." The realization struck me like a physical blow. They wanted me to abandon my studies, the very thing I'd poured my heart and soul into, to fund Liam's legal aspirations and Sarah's college savings. They didn't even attempt to soften the blow. My own parents were asking me to sacrifice my future for theirs. What kind of twisted logic was that? I sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of their outrageous request. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to ask. "Maya, this is a practical solution," Dad said, his voice still carrying that unmistakable lawyer edge. "College doesn't seem to be working out for you the way we'd hoped. We think it's best if you start working full-time and contribute to the household. You can always go back to school later." Go back later, as if it were that simple. A wave of disbelief washed over me. I tried to explain that I was doing fine, that I had plans, a vision for what I wanted my life to be. But it was like talking to a wall. Mom, with her carefully veiled jabs, chimed in, "Higher education isn't for everyone, Maya. There's no shame in honest work." Something inside me just snapped. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "So, you want me to drop out to help pay for Liam and Sarah's futures?" My voice wavered, betraying my anger and hurt. "What about me? Does what I want even matter?" Dad just sighed, a dramatic display of disappointment. Mom shook her head, a gesture dripping with disapproval. "We've given you plenty of opportunities, Maya," Dad said, his words sharp. "You've never been as focused as your siblings. We're just being realistic about where you fit in this family." That stung, deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about the money or even the school. It was about how they saw me, always, as some kind of afterthought, a safety net in case Liam or Sarah didn't reach their full potential. In that moment, the crushing realization hit me. No matter what I accomplished, I would never be good enough for them. A surge of defiance welled up inside me, surprising even myself. I stood up, looked them straight in the eye, and said, "I'm not dropping out. If you're done with me, fine. I'll figure it out myself." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. Mom's face was pale, like she'd seen a ghost. Dad just looked furious, his jaw tight. I think they genuinely believed I would crumble, that I would meekly agree to their plan. But not this time. I was done being their plan B. Even after the conversation with my parents, I was in complete shock. Like, how did this even happen? One minute I'm in college, doing fine, and the next I'm being told I'm basically useless and need to quit everything I've been working for to help Liam and Sarah. It hit me hard, like a physical blow. Yet, in a way, I wasn't entirely surprised. That's just how things always seem to play out in our family. Liam and Sarah were the sun, moon, and stars, and I was the dust bunnies under the sofa. After I told them I was staying in school, the atmosphere in the house thickened with unspoken tension. Dad didn't react immediately, just stared, a disappointed frown etching itself onto his face as if I'd personally offended him. Then, Mom, predictably, the waterworks began. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, repeating, "We're doing this for you, Maya. We only want what's best for the family." But the only thought echoing in my head was, how is any of this for me? They were prepared to sacrifice my future, my dreams, to ensure Liam and Sarah's paths were paved with gold. I was done. Absolutely finished with their manipulative guilt trips and their blatant favoritism. So, calmly, clearly, I stated, I'm not dropping out. If that's what you want from me, then I'll just leave. I braced myself for an explosion, for more tears, maybe even a shouting match that would shake the foundations of the house. But instead, Mom just continued to cry silently, and Dad mumbled something under his breath about, "She'll regret this decision." They didn't try to reason with me, didn't try to dissuade me, didn't even try to physically stop me from leaving. It was as if my presence or absence made no difference to them at all. I went upstairs, a numb feeling spreading through my body, and hauled out my old suitcase, the one we used for those excruciatingly long family vacations when I was a kid. I hadn't touched it in years. It felt surreal, dragging it across the floor, like preparing for a regular trip, except this time, I had no idea when, or even if, I would be coming back. I began throwing clothes in haphazardly, nothing special, just the bare necessities. A couple of pairs of jeans, some basic t-shirts, my worn-out, but cherished, hoodie. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, but I knew I had to get out of that house now before I lost my resolve. As I was packing, I could hear my parents talking downstairs. Mom was still sobbing, and Dad was pacing back and forth, his voice low and agitated as he spoke to her, completely oblivious to the fact that I was still within earshot. I heard him say, "She'll come to her senses eventually," and then, that cutting remark, "She's always been difficult." That single word, difficult, sent a surge of anger through me, causing my hands to tremble. It felt like they didn't even see me as a person with thoughts, feelings, and aspirations, just a problem that needed to be fixed, a loose thread to be snipped. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed to resist the urge to scream at them, to finally unleash all the pent-up frustration that had been simmering inside me for years. Instead, I focused on packing, meticulously folding each item. I grabbed my laptop, a few notebooks filled with half-formed ideas, and, most importantly, the sketchbook I'd been working on for months. Art has always been my refuge, my escape from the world, and I knew I would need it now more than ever to navigate the uncertain road ahead. The zipper strained as I forced the suitcase shut. It was ridiculously heavy, but the weight felt right. A solid counterpoint to the lightness I felt inside, the lightness of finally making this decision. Descending the stairs was the hardest part, each step a physical manifestation of my fear. My legs trembled, and my stomach churned with a nervous energy, but I pressed on, driven by the absolute certainty that I needed to leave. My parents remained in the living room, frozen in their own private worlds. Mom sat motionless, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the wall, the earlier tears now dry. Dad was absorbed in his phone, thumbs flying across the screen, undoubtedly feigning work. A familiar, isolating performance. I paused, a silent plea hanging in the air. I wanted them to say something, anything, to acknowledge me, to fight for me to stay. But the silence stretched, unbroken. They didn't even glance my way. I was invisible. So, I picked up the suitcase, its weight grounding me, and opened the front door. The click as it closed behind me echoed in the sudden stillness. I was gone. I didn't have a concrete plan, not really. Just a vague notion of needing to escape. I started walking, my heart pounding against my ribs, the full force of my decision crashing down on me. This was it. Truly on my own. No safety net, no familiar comforts, just me and this ridiculously heavy suitcase. Hours must have passed. I walked until the streetlights blurred and my feet ached, the initial adrenaline fading to a dull, creeping despair. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Sarah's name. We weren't the closest of friends, but she possessed a quiet strength, a willingness to listen that I desperately needed. I typed a brief message, outlining the situation. Within minutes, her reply popped up, "Come crash at my place. We'll figure it out." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost knocked me off my feet. At least I had somewhere to go tonight. I called an Uber and directed the driver to Sarah's apartment. When she opened the door, she enveloped me in a hug, a fierce, comforting embrace. She didn't pry, didn't demand explanations. Just ushered me inside, helped me heave the suitcase into her spare room, and led me to the couch. Sinking into its soft cushions, I realized it was the first time I'd felt remotely safe in what felt like an eternity. That night unfolded in quiet exhaustion. I was drained, and thankfully, Sarah didn't press me to talk. We just succumbed to the allure of a greasy pizza and some ridiculously addictive reality TV on Netflix. I remember drifting off on the sofa, the flickering screen my lullaby. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confused emotions. I couldn't shake the relentless replay in my mind. My parents, casually suggesting I drop out. Their unsettling nonchalance about the entire situation. The sting of their indifference as I walked out the door. It felt like I had been living a parallel life, never truly interwoven with theirs. But the longer I stayed at Sarah's, a strange clarity began to dawn. Yes, leaving home like that was awful, truly, horribly awful. But woven into that awfulness was a newfound sense of autonomy. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was steering my own ship. No more dancing to my parents' tune, no more contorting myself to fit their prefabricated mold. I finally had the space to breathe and live authentically for myself. The next week became a mission of rebuilding. I connected with my academic advisor, pouring out the whole messy story. She was an absolute lifeline, a beacon of support I desperately needed. She guided me through applications for additional financial aid and even managed to secure me a spot in on-campus housing. It slowly began to sink in. I was going to be okay. I could manage this. It was strangely empowering, this realization that I no longer needed their approval, their permission. This was my doing, my life, my fight. One of the hardest blows came in the form of a text message from my parents. It wasn't an apology, not even a hint of one. Instead, it was veiled in guilt, manipulative little jabs like, "We hope you're doing okay," and the hollow promise of, "Come home, and we can talk." Yeah, right. Their concern wasn't for my well-being. It was a performance, a desperate attempt to maintain appearances within the family. I ignored the bait and doubled down on piecing my life back together, brick by brick. I also reached out to my Aunt Sarah, my mom's sister. She has always been the family rebel, an artist whose free spirit clashes spectacularly with my parents' rigid definition of success. When I shared everything that had happened, her reaction was explosive. "They did what?" she roared over the phone, her voice laced with disbelief and outrage. She immediately offered financial assistance until I could stand on my own 2 feet and even extended an invitation to stay with her during school breaks. It was the first genuine gesture of support I'd received in days, and it dissolved the suffocating feeling of isolation that had been clinging to me. As that week drew to a close, I found myself moving into my dorm room. Surrounded by unpacked boxes and the hum of a new beginning, I cautiously allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Honestly, I was terrified. Let's not pretend otherwise. But tangled up with the fear was this strange, exhilarating sense of liberation. For the first time, I wasn't defined by my parents, wasn't living under their constant scrutiny. It felt like I could finally inhale a full breath. I've been settled into my dorm room for a few weeks now, trying to navigate this new normal. It's still surreal. I go to classes, return to my shoebox of a room, and sometimes just exist. The silence is deafening at times. No shouting matches, no guilt trips strategically deployed, just quiet. It's unsettling, but slowly, I'm adapting. I've even started making a few friends in my classes, which helps. And my part-time job at the library is surprisingly peaceful. Just endless rows of books and plenty of time to get lost in my own thoughts. Then, completely out of the blue, I received a text from Liam. The golden child, the one who always seemed to effortlessly glide through life, never making a wrong move. I hadn't heard a peep from him since I packed my bags and left, and truthfully, I wasn't expecting to. I assumed he would align himself with my parents, as he usually did, feign ignorance of the situation, and continue being the model son. So, seeing his name flash across my phone screen stopped me cold. I wasn't even sure I wanted to acknowledge it. But my curiosity, that pesky little devil, won out. The message was simple, almost curt. Can we meet? I need to talk. No explanation, no apology, just that. My initial instinct was to ignore it, pretend I never saw it. But a part of me, a stubborn, maybe even foolish part, needed to hear what he had to say. After agonizing over it for hours, I finally texted back, suggesting a little coffee shop that was roughly equidistant between my campus and his law school. It felt strategic. At least if the conversation took a turn for the worse, I could make a swift exit. The moment I walked into the cafe, I spotted him. But he was different. Less polished. The always impeccable Liam was replaced by someone who looked almost disheveled. His hair was noticeably unkempt, and his clothes lacked their usual sharpness. There were even shadows under his eyes, making him look weary. For a split second, I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the Liam I grew up with, the guy who always seemed to have everything meticulously planned and perfectly executed. It was disconcerting. We sat down, ordered our coffees, and an awkward silence hung heavy in the air. I didn't know what to say, and judging by the way he kept shifting in his seat, I wasn't the only one struggling to find the right words. Then, abruptly, he just blurted it out. "I'm sorry," he said. No preamble, no carefully constructed justification, just a raw, naked apology. It caught me completely off guard. I arched a brow, a silent challenge. Sorry for what precisely? I managed, working to keep my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil roiling beneath the surface. I wasn't about to let him off the hook with such a vague admission. For everything, I suppose, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the dark liquid swirling in his coffee cup. For not saying anything when I left. For never sticking up for me, not once, over all these years. I don't know. I think, deep down, I always knew how unfair it was, how they treated me. But it was just easier to play along. The weight of his admission hit me harder than I ever anticipated. It stole the breath from my lungs and left me speechless. I'd always operated under the assumption that Liam was simply oblivious, the perpetually favored son blissfully unaware of the subtle, and not so subtle, ways our parents favored him and dismissed me. But to hear him acknowledge that he knew, that he actively chose to remain silent, to prioritize his own comfort over my well-being, the realization was a sharp, unexpected sting. So what changed? I finally asked, the words feeling brittle and foreign on my tongue. I was still grappling with the sheer improbability of him actually apologizing. "Why are you telling me all of this now after all this time?" He sighed, the sound heavy with regret, and ran a frustrated hand through his already disheveled hair. I honestly don't know, Maya. When I saw you stand up to them the other day, it just, it crystallized something inside me. It forced me to confront how truly messed up things are. I always knew on some level, but I actively suppressed it, you know? I was comfortable. I was the favorite. Why would I want to rock the boat, jeopardize my privileged position? I nodded slowly, trying to process the torrent of information, the years of unspoken resentment and unspoken truths finally bubbling to the surface. So, what exactly are you hoping to achieve by telling me all of this, Liam? What do you want from me? Absolution? Forgiveness? No, he said quickly, emphatically, his eyes finally meeting mine. No, I'm not asking for any of that. I needed to talk. I needed you to understand that I finally get it now. He hesitated, then added, almost as an afterthought, and I'm quitting law school. That pronouncement hit me with the force of a physical blow. Liam quitting law school? The golden child, the heir apparent, the future pillar of the family's legal legacy? That was the truly earth-shattering revelation, the one that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about him, about us, about our entire family dynamic. His words slammed into me, echoing the turmoil already swirling inside. Wait, you're quitting? Where did that come from? The bewilderment must have been plastered all over my face. He finally met my gaze, a real, unguarded look, something I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity. Yeah, he said, the word hanging heavy in the air. I've been dreading coming into this office every day for months. It's not me, you know? Being a lawyer, it was never my dream. That was Mom and Dad's vision for me. I just kept going, burying myself in the work, trying to be the son they wanted. Seeing you actually take the plunge, leave, and pursue something you wanted, it was like a jolt. It made me realize I can't keep living a lie. I was floored. Liam, the steadfast, the seemingly unshakable Liam, admitting to being miserable, to living a life dictated by our parents' expectations? It felt surreal, like the world had tilted on its axis. So, what are you going to do? I managed to stammer, still trying to process his revelation. He leaned back, a genuine smile gracing his features for the first time that evening. I'm going to teach. That's what I've always wanted, deep down. But I never let myself consider it a real option. Well, I'm done trying to fulfill their ambitions for me. I'm applying to the education program next semester. A jumble of emotions warred within me. A part of me still felt a simmering resentment. Why had he stayed silent for so long? Why hadn't he ever stood up for me, for us both? But another, larger part of me felt a surge of pride. Pride in him for finally breaking free from the suffocating grip of our parents' expectations. It was a tangled mess of feelings, and I struggled to sort them out. We sat there, the silence punctuated by the clinking of glasses around us. He spoke about the immense pressure of growing up, the constant need to be perfect, to achieve. He confessed that he had envied me, envied my courage to simply walk away, to stop caring about their approval. That caught me completely off guard. I had always seen Liam as the one who had it all together, the golden child. But in that moment, I felt like I was truly seeing him for the first time, not the perfectly crafted son our parents had sculpted, but the raw, vulnerable man underneath. And he seemed just as adrift as I often felt. As our conversation drew to a close, Liam paused, a subtle hesitation in his voice. Do you think, could we maybe spend more time together? I know I haven't been the brother you deserved, but I'd really like to try now. To make up for things. His words hung in the air. I couldn't give him an immediate answer. It required consideration. Yet, after all that he'd shared, after witnessing a depth to him I never knew existed, I cautiously thought it might be worth exploring. Okay, I finally replied, the word feeling fragile. I think we can try. He smiled, and it was the first time in years I genuinely felt like we were connecting on a deeper level. Things weren't magically fixed, and I still harbored a significant amount of anger and resentment, but it felt like a beginning. Walking back to my dorm that day, I was caught in a strange whirlwind of emotions. I was still furious with my parents and trying to navigate my next steps, but at least I wasn't facing it all alone anymore. For the first time, Liam and I were in a similar situation, both trying to define ourselves outside of our parents' expectations. It wasn't the resolution I envisioned, but it was something. And for the moment, that felt like enough. The coffee meet-up with Liam left me with a lot to process. On one hand, I was relieved he finally understood what I'd been going through, but on the other, I couldn't shake the anger at his years of silence. And then, looming over everything, was the complete radio silence from my parents since I left. Absolutely nothing. It felt as if I had ceased to exist in their world, which was perhaps the most unsettling part of it all. That is, until a message from my mom appeared. But it wasn't a heartfelt apology or a sincere expression of love. It was more like a guilt trip masquerading as concern. So typical. The text popped up one evening while I was sitting in my dorm room, wrestling with some assignments. My phone buzzed, and there it was. Maya, we've been thinking about you. We hope you're doing okay. Please come home. We miss you. Right, they missed me. They missed having someone to control. Initially, I wasn't even going to respond, but something about the tone of the message just grated on my nerves. My phone screen glared back at me, their message a flat-out denial of reality. It was as if the past few months, the ones where they essentially told me I wasn't worth pursuing my education, hadn't happened at all. As if suggesting I sacrifice my future to fund Liam and Sarah's was a minor blip. I hesitated, the message hovering in the compose window, a battleground for my conflicting emotions. Should I even dignify it with a response? But before I could overthink it, my fingers took over, typing out a raw, unfiltered retort. Oh, you miss me? Really? Because last I checked, my dreams were worth less than Liam and Sarah's tuition money. What exactly has changed that makes me suddenly valuable to you? The send button felt like dropping a bomb. There was no turning back. They wouldn't be allowed to rewrite history, to act as if their ultimatum hadn't torn a gaping hole in our family. I refused to slink back, tail between my legs, pretending everything was peachy. An hour crawled by, tension coiling tighter in my stomach, before my phone finally buzzed again. This time, it was a novel. Predictably, Dad had jumped into the fray. Maya, that's not a fair characterization, he wrote. We were trying to make the best decision we could for the whole family unit. Your mother and I have always striven to do what's right for you all, and that unfortunately involves making difficult choices. You are and have always been an important part of this family. There's still time to come home and talk it through. I stared at the screen, disbelief hardening into a knot of anger. Difficult choices for the family? What about the choices I was being forced to make? What about my right to a future? It wasn't as if I was asking for the moon, just the simple opportunity to pursue my own path, to have the same chance they were so readily handing to Liam and Sarah. And yet, here they were, painting me as the unreasonable one, as if my perfectly reasonable request was a selfish demand. The hypocrisy was suffocating. A primal urge to hurl my phone against the wall surged through me, but I fought it down, forcing myself to breathe. My fingers danced across the screen once more, fueled by a potent mix of hurt and defiance. You want to know what's not fair? Being treated like my life and dreams are disposable. Being asked to give up everything I've worked for so Liam and Sarah can live the lives they wanted. I'm doing perfectly fine on my own now, so please spare me the guilt trip. You made your choice and I made mine, too. It felt like an eternity before his reply arrived. This time, the gloves were off. You're being incredibly selfish, Maya. We raised you, gave you every opportunity, and this is how you repay us? By completely abandoning your family at the first sign of trouble. I had anticipated a more understanding response. But deep down, I suppose I've always been perceived as a source of aggravation. There it was. Difficult. That label, constantly applied whenever my life choices diverged from their meticulously crafted expectations. It was as though my value was contingent upon becoming a stellar athlete or a beauty queen, or whatever ideal they had conjured. I was weary of that word, of their manipulative tactics. Silence was my only response. I simply lacked the emotional fortitude to engage in another futile argument. The ensuing days passed peacefully. Their silence brought a sense of respite. However, the tranquility was short-lived. Unexpectedly, a cascade of messages from relatives, my aunt, my grandmother, even a distant cousin, flooded my inbox. It became apparent that my parents had initiated a smear campaign, casting me as the heartless instigator of familial discord. My aunt's message was particularly cutting. She implored me to apologize, insisting that my parents were inconsolable and that my actions were fracturing the family. The injustice of it ignited a fire within me. How could I be held accountable for tearing the family apart? My only transgression was asserting myself for once. I hadn't demanded they choose between me and Liam or Sarah. That choice was entirely their own. Yet I was now being painted as the villain. Desperate for support, I reached out to Aunt Sarah, the sole family member who empathized with my predicament. Upon hearing my account, her response was immediate and unwavering. "Your parents are being manipulative, Maya," she declared bluntly. "They're attempting to control you because they sense their influence waning. Don't succumb to their games. You're thriving on your own, and that's something they can't tolerate." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. It was as if a weight had been lifted, granting me the freedom to disregard my parents' judgment. Aunt Sarah, she always danced to the beat of her own drum. In a family that prized conformity, she was a glorious rebel, blazing her own trail. And honestly, she seemed perfectly happy. Maybe it was time I took a page from her book. But just when I thought I was finding some equilibrium, another message pinged on my phone. This one felt different. It wasn't the usual subtle manipulation. This time, it was Mom saying they were selling the house. "We've decided to downsize," she wrote. "It's just too much space for the two of us now that Liam's at law school and Sarah's getting ready for college. We hope you understand, darling." Understanding wasn't exactly what I felt. Shock, maybe. Disbelief, definitely. The house, our house, the one I'd grown up in, the place that held all those messy, complicated memories, was being sold. And I found out via text message. No discussion, no "would you like to come and collect your things?" Just gone. It felt like another piece of me was being erased. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything. What could I even say? "Oh, great. Thanks for selling my childhood without so much as a heads up?" I refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing how deeply that stung. But God, did it sting? As the week wore on, the updates trickled in, not from them, of course, but from well-meaning relatives. The house was officially on the market. Mom and Dad were apparently moving to a smaller place, something more manageable, in a much nicer neighborhood. It was as if they were meticulously crafting a whole new life, one that didn't include me. And I was just supposed to passively accept it? As much as it hurt, I think it was the final, decisive shove I needed. The house, the family, the whole dysfunctional mess of it all. I was finally ready to leave it behind. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. There was no turning back, no hoping for some reconciliation that would probably never come. By the end of that week, I blocked their numbers. I couldn't bear to see their names pop up on my screen anymore. I didn't need the constant guilt trips, the subtle reminders that I never quite measured up to their expectations. I needed peace, and for the first time, I felt like it was within my reach. A strange thing happened. For the first time, I felt truly unbound. It was terrifying, honestly, like stepping off a cliff. But underneath that fear, a sliver of something incredible shone through. I blocked my parents' numbers, bracing for impact, and instead, silence. A vast, echoing quiet I hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. No more guilt trips weaponized against me, no concerned or condescending relatives trying to guide me back to the path they'd chosen. Just peace. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. This quiet was alien. It felt wrong, like a phantom limb aching. I suppose I'd grown so accustomed to the storm that this solitude, this genuine, utter independence, was a completely foreign landscape. Gradually, a rhythm emerged. My classes were going well, and I was actually managing to juggle work and school. The library job turned out to be more than just a paycheck. The hushed atmosphere offered a sanctuary, a place to untangle the knots in my head. I wasn't constantly on edge, wondering if my parents were disapproving or desperately trying to contort myself into the daughter they envisioned. I was simply existing. Then, completely out of the blue, a message pinged. It wasn't from the parental units or some long-lost cousin crawling out of the woodwork. It was from Sarah, my little sister. She'd always seemed to glide effortlessly through life, the golden child, showered with Mom's unwavering attention, the recipient of elaborate, Pinterest-worthy birthday parties. We hadn't really spoken since I left, so seeing her name flash across my phone screen jolted me. Her message was succinct. "Hey, can we talk?" I was instantly wary. Sarah had never been overtly cruel, not exactly, but she'd never exactly been my champion either. She existed in her own orbit, oblivious to the dynamics between me and our parents, blissfully content within her carefully constructed bubble. So why now? What prompted this sudden desire for communication? Part of me wanted to ignore it, let it fade into the digital ether. But after staring at the message for what felt like an eternity, I typed back, "Sure, what's up?" We settled on a time to talk later that night. I had absolutely no idea what to expect, and I'll admit, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Maybe she was calling to lay on another layer of guilt. Or worse, perhaps she was furious that I'd abandoned the family, disrupting the delicate balance of their carefully curated world. When I finally answered the phone, Sarah's voice was subdued, lacking the usual cheerful lilt I associated with her. She sounded different, older. The apology came so unexpectedly, hitting me right between the eyes. "I'm so sorry, Maya," Sarah said, her voice sounding strangely vulnerable. I didn't truly understand before, not about you, not about everything you've been dealing with." It completely threw me for a loop. I hadn't anticipated that, not from her. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, a cautious edge creeping into my voice. I couldn't help but be wary. I could hear her shuffling around on the other end of the line, a subtle sound that suggested she was searching for the right way to articulate her thoughts. "Mom and Dad, they've been talking about you a lot since you left home," she continued. "But I've been thinking about everything too, and I've come to the realization that they've been pretty awful to you. Or, I always knew things were different for you somehow. I just didn't truly see it, you know? It never really clicked until now." Honestly, I was speechless. A part of me wanted to lash out, to be angry that she hadn't realized it all much sooner, that she had been so blind. But another, deeper part of me just felt this immense wave of sadness. A heavy, dull ache in my chest, knowing that she was only now understanding how unfair and messed up things had always been. "Yeah," I finally managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady, betraying as little emotion as possible. "It's been pretty damn rough." Sarah continued talking, and for the first time ever, she opened up to me about her own struggles, things I had never suspected. She talked about the immense pressure Mom put on her, how she had to always be perfect, how everything she did had to be the very best, or it simply wasn't good enough. It wasn't the same as what I had endured, but I could hear the weight of it in her voice, the toll it was taking in a way I'd never picked up on before. "I've been so terrified of disappointing them," Sarah admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "Like if I mess up even once, everything will just fall apart. But seeing you leave and seeing you finally stand up for yourself, it made me realize that I don't want to live like that either. I don't want to constantly strive for perfection." I didn't quite know how to process it all. On the one hand, I felt a sense of relief that Sarah was finally starting to see things clearly, to understand the dynamics of our family. On the other hand, I was still carrying so much anger and hurt, so much resentment from the way I had been treated for so long, and it was hard to just let it go. But I couldn't just push her away. She was reaching out in a way that felt genuinely heartfelt, and I knew, better than anyone, how difficult it was to break free from the grip of our parents' expectations. "I get it," I told her, softening my tone slightly. "It's tough to stand up to them, but you've got to do what's right for you, Sarah. You can't keep living your life for them, or anyone else for that matter." We talked for hours that night, and by the time we hung up, something had definitely shifted between us. It wasn't a magical cure-all, and I still felt the need to protect myself, to keep a bit of distance. But for the first time, I felt like I had a genuine connection with the real Sarah, not the picture-perfect sister she had always tried so hard to be, but the real Sarah, the one who was struggling and vulnerable, just like I had always been. After that long conversation, things began to change even more dramatically. Sarah and I made a conscious effort to stay in touch, talking every few days, just checking in on each other, offering support and understanding where we could. It felt like a slow but steady process of rebuilding our relationship, this time on a foundation of honesty and empathy. It was clear she was still navigating her path, but I admired her determination to carve out her own existence rather than simply fulfilling the expectations our parents had laid out for her. A strange sense of pride welled up inside me. Witnessing her newfound assertiveness, her willingness to stand her ground, filled me with respect. Meanwhile, I was finally beginning to construct a life that truly resonated with me. I found solace and connection by joining a student group specifically for individuals grappling with challenging family histories. Sharing my experiences with others who understood the complexities of toxic family dynamics was incredibly validating. Knowing I wasn't isolated in my struggles provided a profound sense of comfort. One day, seemingly out of nowhere, I received an email from the University Counseling Center. They had learned about my involvement in the support group and proposed that I help develop a peer support program tailored for students facing similar difficulties. The position was a paid one, and it felt as though all the hardships I had endured were finally finding a meaningful purpose. The opportunity to genuinely assist others who were struggling felt monumental. I enthusiastically began brainstorming ideas for the program, drawing heavily from my personal journey and the narratives shared by fellow group members. It was as if all the emotional baggage I carried, the parental expectations, the guilt trips, the relentless pressure, was finally transforming into something positive, something capable of making a tangible difference in the lives of others. As I sat there, sketching out preliminary plans for the program, a profound realization washed over me. I no longer craved my parents' approval. I didn't require their validation, their acknowledgement, or their affirmation that I was on the right track. I had forged my own path, constructed my own reality, and for the first time, I felt a genuine sense of control over my life. Of course, there were still difficult days, moments of longing for the idealized notion of a normal family where I wished things could have unfolded differently. But I was learning to accept those feelings, to integrate them into the tapestry of my life. I was learning to embrace and accept myself, and that was a gift that no one, not even my parents, could ever take away from me.